Travels of the Ellis Arbor is a TTRPG story set in the world of Bastion using the Vagrant Sun campaign setting. Tune in to episode 38, Empowered. Even from across the room, Darian could feel the contempt seething from their roguish host. A quiver of a finger, tension in the shoulders, and the erupting sensation of danger throughout the room. No shot was fired, no sword unsheathed, though the illusion of battle was palpable.
I'd be glad to offer you insight if I can. Truth be told, Nout has absconded with a variety of our possessions. After a brief altercation, he took off without a trace. We've simply been trying to, liaise with him. Clear up a misinterpretation. You understand.
And through the tension that continued to bubble, the figure cocked his head, and a little of his callous disposition drained. Ah, I see. You're also at odds with this little green fellow. It seems odd that you'd describe yourself as his companion, yet he'd be on the run from you. Perhaps that's why he left in such a hurry. It wasn't the whole truth. Darian knew exactly why Nout had run. The bargain he'd struck with the Lady of Blood was an all too clear and present danger to Nout. He'd resurrected an enemy of the Lady against the Captain's better judgment. Though, perhaps the Captain could maintain the ruse a little longer. Long enough, perhaps, to glean where their cyanide friend had headed.
My friend here, Carpathian, he's also an arcanist. Perhaps a show of goodwill. We could peruse your tampered weapons and see if there's naught we could do to reverse their effects.
His curiosity piqued. The robed figure loosed his grip on something below his belt, dusted his hands, and proceeded to calmly reach for the short sword nearby. Thankfully, his ire seemed to be quenched. Carpathian, however, looked sheepish. His knowledge of arcana was adequate, but the nature of Nout's magic was all but foreign. Their host began the process of placing the blade in an articulated machine. It hung in a strange copper apparatus as light was focused onto certain points. A faint white light shone from one particular gemstone and coated the blade in flecks of color. Across the spectrum of light, it shone red, green, gold, and blue, before settling on a dull magenta hue. Well, be my guest. Carpathian, was it? Perhaps you can tell us what's going on here. Has he rewritten the enchantment? Is there something new present? Is there a way to reverse the effects of the sabotage? Calmly, Carpathian stepped toward the device. He lay his spell tome open onto a blank page. A couple of short, sharp taps of his staff, and his eyes began to glow with the same magenta hue as the blade. Under his voice, he began an enchantment to detangle the magical effects upon this broken sword. The crew watched as his hands began to articulate patterns in the air, as if playing a complex series of notes on a piano. He drew arcana in the air as easy as one might tap out a tune. And a moment later, the light faded from his eyes, and a quizzical look formed on his brow. I confess, I do not understand the traditions of Nout's magic, but I do understand the lore of arcana. There is a physicality to this enchantment. The stone in the hilt, and the runes inscribed upon the blade. Neither have been altered, save for one. With a wave of his open hand, the blade inverted, so the opposite side of the flat blade faced the group. A singular rune had been scratched out, replaced with a series of cuts and lines. This refers to the arcane signature, the attunement. For whoever is attuned to this weapon, the rune is designed to send ether in a singular direction. In this case, instead of a target the wielder chooses, it runs backwards, toward the etheric center of a person. I don't feel as though I need to explain what happens then.
A gruff reply, as their host smirked from beneath his mask. Very good. So you mean to tell me that only those who are attuned to the weapon will receive the backlash? Only they will be harmed by this change. A nod in reply. Carpathian stepped away from the apparatus and began to holster his spellbook. So it shouldn't cause any harm if I do this? And at lightning speed, the host moved like shadow, catching the sword from the air and brandishing it in an upward slice. Even sundered as it was, it caused a line of crimson flame to arc upward into the air. It caught Carpathian's arm and his spell tome with it. Hurtling into the air, its open pages began to ruffle. The crew was stunned for but a moment, but enough for their host to retort. You heard him! Pass your weapons along, friends! He's cracked the code! A rush of fury and contempt swept through the party as more than a dozen rogues began to step free from their hiding place. Pistols were flung to each other and hand weapons skidded across the ground. One by one, they began to arm themselves with weapons that would not burst into flame. In barely a second, the crew were surrounded. Enough time to draw their weapons, but not nearly enough time to find a vantage or an offensive position. It was over before it began. Let me tell you how this is going to go, Darian. You and your boys are going to be full of lead if you don't start coughing up information about Goblin. We owe him a little visit, and you will oblige. As I said, we run a tight ship here. I won't be given over to trifling matters. So why don't you give yourself a second to think of a reply? Who knows? Maybe I'm in a charitable mood. This was hardly the first time that Darian had been on the back foot. He'd suspected foul play from the very beginning, of course. All he required was to be in a position in which Edward and Moore were free of their clutches. The rest would have to fall into place. An improvisation. A show of cool, collected tact. He took a deep breath and wore a flat expression on his face. Turning his pistol upward, he replied to his argumentative adversary. Of course, I see no reason to harm you any more than Nout has. He is brilliant, but only a single adversary. It would be a shame to overwhelm you with such alarming numbers. Imagine how devastating 4 of my crew would be to your, 14? Perhaps it's best you let us walk away. Let us find him and bring him to justice. A cackle in reply, as the masked rogue brandished his scorched blade. Are you really so confident? You think brashness and cunning will win you the day? Come now, have some respect. You don't kill a couple of highwaymen and suddenly become a pressing threat. I've more men under my command than could fit in these city walls. Don't be so hasty to give your life over your friend. And before Darian could reply, the villain grabbed at his shirt, tearing the top portion open to reveal his chest. A long, red scar carved from the nape of his neck down to just below his ribs. And there, pulsing just above his heart, was a round, blue gemstone. A crackling, sinister energy. And as his rage billowed, the energy began to pulse, sending an arc of electrostatic from the gemstone upward along the scarred line. You know, Goblin wasn't all that unhelpful. He did help us manufacture a thing or two. Perhaps you'll be the grand test subjects that prove his worth after all. Ha! Imagine that! He tried to sabotage our operation and got his companions killed in the process. The confidence upon Darian's face turned to focus.
His muscles tensed, and his mind renewed. He saw the pressing threat as it was. The arcane stones they'd found on their path here led to this. Nout is a brilliant artificer, and Darian knew better than to undermine his work. Carpathian! Now! A pulsating wave of energy leapt from Carpathian's staff and warbled in the air around them. Both Moore and Edward ducked for cover, and the Dew Downs refinery erupted in gunfire. Travels of the Ellis Arbor is made possible by the generous support of our subscribers, followers, and most notably, our patrons. Thanks to all our Moon, Wedge, Crown, and Hex tier patrons for supporting us so far in this journey. Please subscribe, give a like or a comment, follow us on Twitter, and stay tuned for the next episode. Make sure to follow us here on YouTube, on Spotify, and on twitch.tv/lonomy. Don't forget, take care of each other.